The gunshot echoed through the crowded saloon, silencing the raucous laughter and clinking glasses in an instant. Felicity Summers stood her ground, her chest heaving and eyes blazing with righteous fury as the man who had grabbed her collapsed to the sawdust-covered floor, clutching his bleeding hand. She never saw the second man draw his weapon, never heard the warning shouts before the bullet tore through her side, spinning her delicate frame like a broken marionette before she crumpled to the ground in a pool of crimson. San Jose, California, 1876, was no place for a woman alone, especially not one as striking as Felicity. The gold rush had transformed this once sleepy agricultural town into a bustling hub where fortunes were won and lost daily, and where men outnumbered women 5-1. What had begun as a simple evening at the Silver Dollar Saloon, where Felicity worked not as a dancer or saloon girl, but as a bookkeeper, had spiraled into violence when Harlan Doyle, a notorious local troublemaker, had decided the pretty accountant would make a fine addition to his evening's entertainment. Jackson Blackburn had been nursing a whiskey at the far end of the bar when the commotion started. A cattle driver by trade, he just delivered a herd to the local stockyard and had been planning to enjoy a well-earned drink before heading back to his employer's ranch the following morning. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy had noticed the auburn-haired woman when she'd entered earlier, clipboard in hand, clearly there on business rather than pleasure. He'd admired her professional demeanor and the way she had politely but firmly rebuffed the attention of several would-be suitors. When Doyle grabbed her arm and pulled her roughly against him, Jackson had set down his glass, ready to intervene. But the woman had handled herself with surprising efficiency, jamming her heel into Doyle's instep, before drawing a small derringer from her pocket and shooting him cleanly through the hand when he wouldn't release her. It was Doyle's friend, a rat-faced man named Lyle Peabody, who'd drawn and fired in retaliation, catching her in the side before Jackson or anyone else could stop him. Now, as the saloon erupted into chaos, Jackson vaulted over a table and rushed to the woman's side. Blood was spreading rapidly across her blue calico dress, and her face had gone alarmingly pale. The local sheriff, a portly man named Mills, had appeared and was already restraining Peabody, who was spluttering excuses about defending his friend. "She needs a doctor," Jackson said grimly, kneeling beside the wounded woman. "Doc Sullivan's office is 3 blocks down," someone called out. Without hesitation, Jackson gently lifted the woman into his arms, cradling her against his chest. She was lighter than he expected, and she moaned softly as he adjusted his hold to apply pressure to her wound. "Stay with me, miss," he murmured as he pushed through the batwing doors and into the cool night air. "I'm taking you to the doctor." Felicity's vision swam in and out of focus as the stranger carried her through the darkened streets of San Jose. Pain radiated from her side in pulsing waves, each one threatening to pull her under into unconsciousness. She fought to stay awake, instinctively knowing that surrendering to the darkness might mean never waking again. "Who?" She managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the sound of the cowboy's boots on the boardwalk. "Name's Jackson Blackburn," he replied, his pace never slowing. "Everyone calls me Jack." "Felicity," she replied, wincing as a particularly sharp bolt of pain shot through her. "Felicity Summers." "Well, Miss Summers, you've got a fair amount of grit for a bookkeeper. Never seen a lady handle a derringer quite like that." Despite the pain, Felicity felt a ghost of a smile cross her lips. "My father insisted, said San Jose was too rough for a woman who couldn't protect herself." "Your father's a wise man," Jackson said, turning down a side street. Ahead, a small clapboard building with a sign reading Dr. Franklin Sullivan, physician and surgeon came into view. Almost there now. Jackson kicked at the door with his boot, the hollow thudding echoing in the quiet street. After a moment, light appeared in the windows and the door swung open to reveal a middle-aged man with spectacles and tousled gray hair, wearing a hastily donned dressing gown. "Good Lord," the doctor exclaimed, taking in the sight of the bleeding woman in Jackson's arms. "Bring her in, quickly." Inside the small surgery, Jackson carefully laid Felicity on an examination table, while Dr. Sullivan lit additional lamps and gathered his instruments. Felicity's eyes found Jackson's, fear mingling with determination in her gaze. "Don't leave," she whispered, her blood-stained fingers finding his wrist. Jackson nodded solemnly. "I'll be right here, Miss Summers." Dr. Sullivan approached, scissors in hand. "I need to cut away her dress to see the wound. Perhaps you should wait outside, Mr. Blackburn." "And I promised the lady I'd stay," Jackson replied firmly, though he respectfully turned his back as the doctor began to cut away Felicity's blood-soaked garments. "Gunshot?" the doctor asked briskly. "Yes," Jackson confirmed. "At the Silver Dollar. She shot a man who was manhandling her and his friend retaliated." "Harlan Doyle?" the doctor asked knowingly. "The very same." Dr. Sullivan made a noise of disgust. "That man has been a menace since he was in short pants. How's his hand? Bleeding, but he'll live. More's the pity." "Indeed," the doctor agreed, now focused on examining Felicity's wound. "Miss, you're fortunate. The bullet passed through your side, missing vital organs. It's a clean wound, though you've lost a fair amount of blood." Felicity nodded weakly, her face ghostly pale against the white of the examination table. "Will I recover fully? With proper care, yes. You're young and appear to be in good health otherwise, but you'll need rest and someone to tend to you while you heal." Jackson spoke up from his position near the door. "She can stay at the Windsor Hotel. I'll pay for the room and see that she has whatever she needs." Felicity tried to protest. "I couldn't possibly." "You could and you will," Jackson interrupted gently, "unless you have family nearby." Felicity shook her head slightly. "My father passed last year. I'm alone in San Jose." Dr. Sullivan had begun cleaning the wound with a carbolic solution, causing Felicity to gasp and clutch at the edges of the table. "This will sting, Miss Summers, but it's necessary to prevent infection. Mr. Blackburn, if you're determined to stay, perhaps you could hold her hand. It might help." Jackson moved to Felicity's side, offering his calloused hand, which she grasped tightly. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone who had lost so much blood, and her eyes, though glazed with pain, met his with unwavering courage. "I'm going to stitch the wound now," Dr. Sullivan warned. "It will be painful, I'm afraid." Jackson kept his eyes on Felicity's face as the doctor worked, murmuring encouragements and allowing her to crush his fingers when the pain became too intense. She never screamed, though tears tracked silently down her cheeks, and once or twice she bit her lip so hard it nearly bled. An hour later, the wound was cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. Dr. Sullivan had given Felicity a dose of laudanum for the pain, and her grip on Jackson's hand had relaxed as the medicine took effect. "She'll need to rest here tonight," the doctor said, washing his hands in a basin. "I want to monitor her for fever. Tomorrow, if all is well, she can be moved to the hotel you mentioned. She'll need complete bed rest for at least a week, and then limited activity for several weeks after that." Jackson nodded, finally releasing Felicity's hand as her eyes fluttered closed. "I'll make the arrangements at the Windsor first thing in the morning." "You're not from around here, are you, Mr. Blackburn?" the doctor asked, studying the cowboy's trail-worn appearance. "No, sir. I work for the Circle B Ranch outside of Santa Clara. Was just delivering a herd to the stockyards." And yet you're willing to extend such generosity to a stranger." Jackson looked down at Felicity's sleeping form, a frown creasing his weathered features. She was defending her honor, and she got shot for it. "Doesn't seem right to just ride off and leave her with no one to help." Dr. Sullivan smiled slightly. "There aren't many men who would see it that way, Mr. Blackburn. You're welcome to use my spare room for the night. I suspect Miss Summers will feel more at ease knowing you're nearby when she wakes." Jackson accepted the offer with a nod of thanks, though he spent most of the night in a chair beside Felicity's bed, watching for any signs of fever or distress. The laudanum kept her deeply asleep, her breathing slow and steady, her face peaceful despite the ordeal she had endured. As dawn broke, painting the doctor's small surgery with golden light, Jackson found himself studying Felicity's features. In repose, without the tension of pain or fear, she was strikingly beautiful. High cheekbones, a straight nose, full lips, and the longest eyelashes he'd ever seen on a woman. Her auburn hair, partially undone from its pins, spread across the pillow like a fan of burnished copper. "You're quite the remarkable woman, Felicity Summers," he murmured softly. "Most ladies I know would have swooned at the first sign of trouble, let alone shot a man and lived to tell the tale." To his surprise, Felicity's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of fine whiskey. "Most ladies," she whispered hoarsely, "haven't had to fend for themselves in a town like San Jose." Jackson reached for a glass of water on the nearby table. "Thirsty," she nodded, and he carefully helped her take a sip, supporting her head with his hand. The intimacy of the gesture wasn't lost on either of them, and a faint blush colored Felicity's pale cheeks. "You stayed," she said when she'd finished drinking. "I said I would. Most men I know don't keep their promises." "Then you know the wrong kind of men, Miss Summers." The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Apparently so, Mr. Blackburn." Dr. Sullivan entered then, looking pleased to find his patient awake and alert. After a thorough examination, he pronounced that Felicity was doing well enough to be moved to the hotel, provided she went directly to bed and stayed there. "I've taken the liberty of sending word to the Windsor," Jackson said. "They're preparing a room for you as we speak. I've also asked them to send a woman to help with personal matters." Felicity looked both grateful and embarrassed. "Mr. Blackburn, your kindness is overwhelming, but I can't accept such charity." "I have some savings, and consider it a loan then if your pride demands it," Jackson interrupted. "You can repay me when you're well if you insist. But for now, Miss Summers, please just accept the help." She studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "A loan, then, with interest." Jackson grinned, the expression transforming his serious face into something quite handsome. "If you insist on interest, I might have to charge you a supper at that fancy restaurant near the hotel once you're back on your feet." Felicity's eyes widened slightly at his boldness, but then she smiled back. "That would be acceptable terms, Mr. Blackburn." An hour later, wrapped in a borrowed blanket and carried once again in Jackson's strong arms, Felicity was transported to the Windsor Hotel. The establishment was the finest in San Jose, catering to wealthy businessmen and the occasional Eastern tourist. The manager, a dapper man named Perkins, personally showed them to a comfortable room on the second floor, overlooking the town's central plaza. A matronly woman named Mrs. Dunwoody had been engaged to help Felicity with dressing, bathing, and other necessities. After ensuring that Felicity was comfortably settled and that Mrs. Dunwoody understood Dr. Sullivan's instructions, Jackson reluctantly prepared to leave. "I need to report back to my employer," he explained, standing awkwardly at the foot of the bed where Felicity rested against a mound of pillows. "But I'll return to check on you tomorrow if that's agreeable." Felicity nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his eyes. "You've done far more than duty required, Mr. Blackburn. I wouldn't want to keep you from your responsibilities." "Jack," he corrected gently. "And it's no hardship, Miss Summers. The Circle B is just a few hours' ride. I can come into town easily enough." "Felicity," she replied. "And thank you, Jack, for everything." He tipped his hat, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Rest well, Felicity. I'll see you tomorrow." After he left, Mrs. Dunwoody helped Felicity into a clean nightgown that the hotel had provided and brushed out her tangled hair. "That's quite a gentleman you've found yourself, Miss Summers," the older woman commented. "Not many cowboys would go to such lengths for a lady in distress." "He's not my gentleman," Felicity corrected, though the thought sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "We're strangers who happened to cross paths at an unfortunate moment." Mrs. Dunwoody made a non-committal noise. "If you say so, dear. Now let's get some broth into you. Doctor's orders." The next few days passed in a haze of pain, sleep, and gradual healing. True to his word, Jackson returned the following day, bringing with him a bouquet of wildflowers and the news that he had spoken to Sheriff Mills, who confirmed that both Harlan Doyle and Lyle Peabody had been arrested, Doyle for assault and Peabody for attempted murder. "The sheriff said there were plenty of witnesses who saw Doyle grab you first," Jackson explained, seated in a chair beside Felicity's bed. "No one's blaming you for defending yourself. In fact, several of the ladies in town have expressed their admiration for your directness in handling the situation." Felicity couldn't help but laugh, though she quickly regretted it as pain lanced through her side. "I imagine the gentlemen of San Jose will think twice before manhandling the local women now." "They certainly should," Jackson agreed, his expression sobering. "Though I hate that you had to pay such a high price to teach them that lesson." Each day afterward, Jackson would ride into town to check on her, staying for an hour or two to keep her company. He brought books from the local lending library, knowing she was growing bored with enforced bed rest. Sometimes he would read to her, his deep voice giving life to the adventures of characters from Dickens, Twain, or Scott. Felicity found herself looking forward to his visits with increasing anticipation. There was something about Jackson Blackburn that put her at ease, a straightforwardness, a lack of pretense that was refreshing after years of dealing with men who either underestimated her intelligence or viewed her only as a potential conquest. A week after the shooting, Dr. Sullivan pronounced Felicity well enough to sit up in a chair for short periods. Jackson arrived that afternoon to find her seated by the window, gazing out at the bustling town square below. "This is progress," he said with a smile, setting down a small package on the table beside her. "You're looking better every day." It was true. Color had returned to her cheeks, and though she was still weak, the pain in her side had reduced to a dull ache that flared only when she moved too quickly. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the package. "Open it and see." Inside was a small leather-bound journal and a fine fountain pen. "I noticed you didn't have anything to write with," Jackson explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "You mentioned your work as a bookkeeper, so I thought you might miss it." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Felicity ran her fingers over the smooth leather of the journal. "This is. Thank you, Jack. It's perfect." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's nothing fancy." "It's not nothing," she insisted. "No one has given me such a considerate gift in a very long time." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the connection that had been growing stronger with each visit. Jackson cleared his throat and looked away first. "I spoke with your employer at the Silver Dollar," he said. "Fellow named Henderson," Felicity nodded. "Mr. Henderson owns the saloon. I keep his books, did keep his books, I suppose." He was quite concerned about you. Said to tell you your position is waiting whenever you're well enough to return. He's hired a temporary replacement, but apparently the man isn't half as efficient as you are." Relief washed over Felicity. She had been worrying about her livelihood, knowing that her modest savings wouldn't last long with the expenses of her medical care and lodging. That's wonderful news. Thank you for speaking with him." Jackson hesitated, then added, "He also said something else, that you've been living in a room above the saloon. Is that true?" Felicity nodded, her chin lifting slightly in defiance. "It's affordable, and the location is convenient for my work. Mr. Henderson is a fair employer and landlord. It's also directly above a saloon full of rowdy cowboys and miners," Jackson pointed out, a note of concern in his voice. "After what happened—" "I can take care of myself," Felicity interrupted, her pride stung. "Or have you forgotten how this all started?" Jackson's expression softened. "I haven't forgotten. You're one of the bravest women I've ever met, Felicity. But even the bravest of us sometimes needs a safer haven." She sighed, deflating slightly. "Perhaps you're right. But decent accommodations in San Jose don't come cheap, especially for a woman alone." "I might have a solution," Jackson said carefully, "if you're willing to hear me out." Intrigued, Felicity nodded for him to continue. "My employer at the Circle B, Mr. Benjamin, owns a small cottage in town. His daughter used to live there before she married and moved east. It's been sitting empty for the past year or so. When I mentioned your situation to him, he offered to rent it to you at a fair price." Felicity was stunned. "You spoke to your employer about me?" Jackson had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I may have mentioned helping a lady who was injured." "Mr. Benjamin is a good man with 3 daughters of his own. He was sympathetic to your circumstances, and he's willing to rent me a cottage sight unseen." "Well, he did ask me to vouch for your character," Jackson admitted, "which I did wholeheartedly. The cottage isn't large, but it's well maintained and in a respectable neighborhood near the church. You'd have privacy and safety." Felicity was silent for a long moment, turning the offer over in her mind. It was tempting more than tempting. The thought of returning to her small room above the saloon, of passing by the spot where she'd been shot each day, filled her with a dread she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "I'd need to see it first," she finally said, "and understand the terms clearly before agreeing." Jackson nodded, looking pleased. "Of course. Dr. Sullivan says you should be well enough for a short carriage ride in another week or so. I can take you to see it then." "Why are you doing all this, Jack?" Felicity asked suddenly, searching his face. "You've gone far beyond what anyone would expect from a good Samaritan." He met her gaze steadily. "Because from the moment I saw you stand up to Harlan Doyle, I knew you were someone worth knowing, Felicity Summers. And because, in this world, sometimes people need a helping hand, even when they're strong enough to stand on their own." His honesty disarmed her, and Felicity found herself blinking back unexpected tears. "I'm not accustomed to accepting help," she admitted quietly. "After my father died, I learned quickly that most offers of assistance came with strings attached." "No strings," Jackson promised. "Just one cowboy trying to do right by a lady who's had more than her share of bad luck." 2 more weeks passed, with Jackson visiting daily. As Felicity's strength returned, their conversations deepened. She learned that he had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, that he had come west after the war with nothing but his horse and the clothes on his back. He'd worked his way up from ranch hand to trusted foreman, earning a reputation for honesty and hard work. In turn, Jackson discovered that Felicity had been raised by her father, a professor of mathematics who had moved west hoping the climate would improve his chronic respiratory ailments. She had learned bookkeeping from him, and had taken on small jobs to support them both when his health began to fail. After his death, she had found that her skills were in demand in a booming town where many businessmen had more money than education. On a clear spring morning, exactly 3 weeks after the shooting, Jackson arrived at the Windsor with a rented carriage to take Felicity to see the cottage. Dr. Sullivan had given his approval for the excursion, provided she didn't overexert herself, dressed in a simple blue dress that Mrs. Dunwoody had helped her purchase to replace the one ruined by the shooting. Felicity felt almost like herself again as Jackson carefully helped her into the carriage. The wound in her side still pulled uncomfortably with certain movements, but the pain had diminished to a manageable level. "You look beautiful," Jackson said as he settled beside her on the seat, his voice carrying a hint of awe that made Felicity blush. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing her skirts nervously. "It feels strange to be out in the world again after so many days confined to that room." Jackson nodded in understanding. "Like stepping out of a cave into the sunlight. I felt the same way after I took a bullet at Chancellorsville and spent months recovering in a field hospital." Felicity's eyes widened. "You fought in the war. You never mentioned that." A shadow passed over Jackson's face. "Not something I like to dwell on. I was young and foolish, convinced the Confederacy was fighting for states' rights, not slavery. Took a Yankee bullet in the shoulder and spent enough time lying in that hospital to do some hard thinking about what I was really fighting for." He shook his head. "Decided when I recovered that I wanted no more part in it. Deserted, came west, started over." The admission clearly cost him something to make, and Felicity reached over to touch his hand lightly. "Thank you for telling me. Few men would admit to such a change of heart." "Few men have the privilege of a second chance," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I've tried not to waste mine." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings, until Jackson cleared his throat and picked up the reins. "Shall we see this cottage, then?" The drive through San Jose was pleasant, the spring air fragrant with blossoming fruit trees. Jackson pointed out landmarks: the new courthouse under construction, the market where farmers brought their produce, the school where Mr. Benjamin's youngest daughter had once taught. They turned onto a quiet street lined with modest but well-maintained homes, each with a small garden. At the end of the block stood a white clapboard cottage with blue shutters and a welcoming front porch. "This is it," Jackson said, bringing the carriage to a stop. "What do you think?" Felicity took in the neat picket fence, the rose bushes beginning to bud beside the front steps, the curtained windows that promised privacy and comfort. "It's charming," she admitted. "Almost too charming to be real." Jackson laughed as he came around to help her down from the carriage. "Real enough, I assure you. Mind your step now." He kept a supportive hand under her elbow as they walked up the path to the front door. Jackson produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the door, standing back to let Felicity enter first. The interior was simple but welcoming: a small parlor with a fireplace, a compact kitchen with a cast iron stove, a bedroom with a window overlooking a garden where fruit trees stood in neat rows. Everything was clean and well-maintained, if slightly dusty from disuse. "Mr. Benjamin's daughter left most of the furniture when she moved east," Jackson explained as Felicity ran her fingers over the back of a comfortable-looking armchair. "He said you're welcome to use it all." "It's perfect," Felicity said softly, turning in a slow circle to take in the cottage. "Truly, I couldn't have imagined anything better." "So you'll take it?" Jackson asked, looking pleased. Felicity hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yes, if Mr. Benjamin's terms are reasonable. When could I move in?" "As soon as Dr. Sullivan gives you a clean bill of health." "Another week, perhaps?" They settled onto the porch steps to discuss the details, with Jackson explaining that Mr. Benjamin was asking only a modest rent, less than you were paying for that room above the saloon, he assured her. As they talked, a neighbor across the street waved to them an older woman who was hanging laundry on a line in her yard. "That's Mrs. Whittaker," Jackson explained, returning the wave. "Mr. Benjamin says she's lived on this street for 20 years. Knows everyone and everything that happens in the neighborhood." "Is that a recommendation or a warning?" Felicity asked with a smile. "Both, I suspect, but she's kind by all accounts. Brought soup to Mr. Benjamin's daughter when she was ill last winter." The image of living in this peaceful cottage, of having neighbors who cared enough to bring soup when one was ill, of having a front porch where she could sit in the evenings and watch the world go by, it was almost overwhelming after years of the noisy, chaotic life above the saloon. "You're crying," Jackson said softly, his expression concerned. "Are you in pain? Should we go back to the hotel?" Felicity shook her head, wiping at her cheeks. "No, I'm fine. It's just, I haven't had a real home since my father died. I'd forgotten what it might feel like." Jackson's hand found hers, his calloused fingers wrapping gently around her smaller ones. "Everyone deserves a place to call home, Felicity." She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, the kind blue eyes, the strong jaw softened now with emotion, the mouth that so often quirked into that crooked smile she had come to look forward to each day. "Jack," she began hesitantly, "when I'm settled here, would you? That is, I believe I owe you a supper at that fancy restaurant, for interest on my loan." The smile she'd been hoping for appeared, warming his entire face. "I'd like that very much, Felicity." By the time they returned to the Windsor, Felicity was tired but happier than she'd been in years. Plans had been made for her to move into the cottage the following week, contingent on Dr. Sullivan's approval. Jackson would help with the moving, and Mrs. Dunwoody had offered to introduce her to some of the ladies in the neighborhood. The next few days passed quickly, filled with preparations for the move. Mr. Henderson from the Silver Dollar visited, bringing flowers and the news that her job would be waiting whenever she felt ready to return. He also returned the few possessions she had left in her room above the saloon: books, clothing, a small wooden box containing her mother's jewelry, and her father's pocket watch. "Been saving these for you," he said gruffly. "Never doubted you'd be back on your feet, Miss Summers. You're made of sterner stuff than most." The day before she was to move into the cottage, Jackson arrived at the Windsor with an unexpected visitor, his employer, Mr. Benjamin, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes. "Miss Summers," he said, taking her hand. "I'm pleased to finally meet the young lady who has so impressed my foreman. Jack has spoken quite highly of you." Felicity glanced at Jackson, who was looking slightly embarrassed, then back to Mr. Benjamin. "The honor is mine, sir. Your generosity in offering the cottage is overwhelming." "Nonsense," the older man replied with a wave of his hand. "The place has been sitting empty, gathering dust. Better to have someone living there who will appreciate it. Jack tells me you're a bookkeeper by trade." "Yes, sir. I've been keeping the accounts for several businesses in town, including the Silver Dollar Saloon." Mr. Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "As it happens, I'm in need of someone to organize the ranch accounts. My current bookkeeper is retiring at the end of the month. Would you consider taking on the Circle BTK's books as well? You could work from your cottage, and Jack could deliver the ledgers each week when he comes to town." Felicity was stunned by the offer. The Circle B was one of the largest cattle operations in the area, and handling their accounts would be both prestigious and lucrative. I would be honored, Mr. Benjamin, but are you certain? You've only just met me." The rancher smiled. Jack's judgment of character has never led me astray in the 15 years he's worked for me. If he says you're the most capable bookkeeper in San Jose, then that's good enough for me. Jackson's faith in her was both touching and intimidating. I'll do my best to prove worthy of that recommendation, Felicity promised. After Mr. Benjamin left, promising to send the ranch ledgers with Jackson the following week, Felicity turned to the cowboy with wide eyes. The most capable bookkeeper in San Jose, Jackson grinned sheepishly. Well, Henderson did say you were twice as efficient as your replacement. Jack, she said seriously, you've changed my entire life in the span of a month. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. His expression sobered. You don't owe me anything, Felicity. If anything, meeting you has changed my life for the better. How so? She asked, genuinely curious. He seemed to struggle with his words for a moment. I've been a drifter at heart, even after 15 years with the Circle B. Never put down roots, never looked too far ahead. But lately, I've been thinking, well, that some things are worth staying in one place for. The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. Instead, Felicity said softly, I'm glad you were there that night, Jack. Not just because you saved my life, but because it brought you into it. His eyes held hers, the emotion in them unmistakable. So am I, Felicity. So am I. The move to the cottage went smoothly, with Jackson and 2 hands from the Circle B transporting Felicity's few belongings from the hotel. Mrs. Dunwoody had rallied several ladies from her church to help make the cottage homey, contributing a colorful quilt for the bed, curtains for the kitchen windows, and a basket of preserves and baked goods to stock the pantry. By sunset, Felicity was settled in her new home, seated in the comfortable armchair by the front window with a cup of tea. Jackson lingered after the others had gone, building a small fire in the hearth against the evening chill. How does it feel? He asked, dusting his hands off as the kindling caught. Being a homeowner well, renter at last, Felicity smiled, taking in the cozy room bathed in the golden glow of firelight. Wonderful. Peaceful. I keep expecting to hear the piano from downstairs or boots stomping on the stairs. Jackson chuckled. Might take some getting used to, though Mrs. Whittaker did warn me her rooster crows at an ungodly hour each morning. I'll take a rooster over drunken cowboys any day, Felicity replied with a laugh that only twinged her side a little now. Will you stay for supper, Mrs. Dunwoody brought enough food to feed an army. The invitation was casual, but both felt the shift it represented from patient and caretaker to something more personal, more equal. Jackson accepted, and they shared a simple meal at the small kitchen table, talking easily about the Circle B's accounts, about the books Felicity had been reading during her recovery, about Jackson's plans to purchase his own small parcel of land someday. I've been saving, he explained. Nothing grand, just enough acres for a decent herd and a proper house. Mr. Benjamin has been teaching me about breeding stock, improving bloodlines. I think I could make a go of it in time. I have no doubt you could succeed at anything you set your mind to, Jack, Felicity said sincerely. You have a steadiness about you, a resolve. He looked pleased at her assessment. My father used to say I was as stubborn as our old mule. I prefer your description. As the evening grew late, Jackson reluctantly rose to leave. I should let you rest. It's been a long day and you're still healing. At the door, he paused, his hat in his hands. Felicity, about that supper you mentioned at the fancy restaurant. Would this Saturday be too soon? Her heart quickened at the formal invitation. Saturday would be perfect. I'll call for you at 6 then, he said, a smile lighting his eyes. Then, with a gentleness that took her breath away, he leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her cheek. Good night, Felicity. Good night, Jack, she whispered. her fingers touching the spot where his lips had been as she watched him walk down the garden path and disappear into the darkness. The restaurant was indeed fancy by San Jose standards: white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and a menu featuring dishes with French names that Felicity could barely pronounce. Jackson arrived precisely at 6 on Saturday evening, wearing a clean black suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. "You look beautiful," he said when she opened the door, his eyes taking in the green silk dress she had splurged on for the occasion, her first new dress in over a year. "So do you," she replied with a smile, "though you look like you might be more comfortable back in your cowboy attire." He laughed, adjusting his collar. "That obvious, is it? Mr. Benjamin insisted I borrow this suit from his son, said a lady as fine as you deserved a gentleman in proper attire. Mr. Benjamin seems very invested in our friendship," Felicity observed as Jackson helped her with her shawl. "He lost his wife 10 years ago," Jackson explained. "I think he's developed a bit of a matchmaking tendency since his daughters all married. Best to humor him." The evening was everything Felicity had hoped for. The food was excellent, the wine was smooth, and the conversation flowed as easily as it always did between them. Yet there was a new undercurrent, a sense of possibility that hadn't been acknowledged before. Over dessert, a decadent chocolate cake that Felicity insisted they share, Jackson reached across the table to take her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "The Circle B is a fine ranch, and Mr. Benjamin has been more than fair to me. But that land I mentioned, the piece I've been saving for, there's a parcel coming available next month, just outside of town. Close enough that someone could, say, keep working in San Jose if they wanted to." Felicity's breath caught as she understood what he was suggesting. "Jack, are you saying you're planning to stay in the area?" He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am. For the first time in my life, Felicity, I've found someone worth building a future around. If you'll let me court you properly, that is." Joy blossomed in her chest, so intense it almost hurt. "I would like that very much, Jack." His smile was radiant. "Good, because I've grown quite attached to you, Felicity Summers, more attached than I ever thought possible." They walked home slowly under a canopy of stars, Jackson's arm supporting her though she scarcely needed it now. At her door, he kissed her properly for the first time, a gentle, lingering kiss that promised more to come. "I'll call on you tomorrow," he said when they finally parted. "Perhaps we could attend church together." Felicity nodded, too happy for words, and watched him walk away with a lighter step than she'd ever seen before. Over the following months, their courtship progressed with a steady certainty that felt right to both of them. Jackson purchased the parcel of land he'd mentioned, and began building a modest but comfortable house on it, riding into town nearly every day to see Felicity. She flourished in her new home and expanded her bookkeeping business, taking on not only the Circle B's accounts, but those of several other prominent businesses in the growing town. The shooting that had brought them together became a distant memory, though Felicity would always carry the small scar on her side as a reminder. Harlan Doyle and Lyle Peabody had both been convicted, Doyle of assault, Peabody of attempted murder, and sentenced to terms in the state prison at San Quentin. By Christmas, Jackson's house was complete enough that he could move in, though he continued to work for the Circle B while establishing his own small herd on his land. Mr. Benjamin, delighted by the romance he felt partially responsible for, gifted the couple with a fine breeding bull as an early wedding present, an assumption that made both Felicity and Jackson blush, but neither contradicted. It was on a crisp January evening, with snow dusting the distant mountains and a fire crackling in Felicity's hearth. that Jackson finally asked the question that had been on his mind for months. They had been discussing the spring planting for the kitchen garden he'd laid out behind his new house when he suddenly fell silent, his expression turning serious. "What is it?" Felicity asked, concerned by the change in his demeanor. "Is something wrong with the house?" "The house is fine," he assured her. "Better than fine, but it's missing something important." "What's that?" "You," he said simply. Then, to her astonishment, he slid from his chair onto one knee before her, taking her hands in his. "Felicity Summers, from the moment I carried you bleeding to Dr. Sullivan's office, something inside me knew you were the one I'd been waiting for all my life. You're the bravest, smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I can't imagine spending another day without knowing you'll be by my side forever." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect diamond. "Will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Felicity's eyes as she looked from the ring to the face of the man she had come to love with all her heart. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jack, I will marry you." The joy on his face was matched only by her own as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. They were married on the first day of spring, in the garden of what would now be their home together. Mr. Benjamin stood as Jackson's best man, beaming with paternal pride. Mrs. Dunwoody and Mrs. Whittaker had taken charge of the decorations, transforming the simple garden into a bower of early blossoms and ribbons. Dr. Sullivan attended with his wife, raising a toast to the couple whose unlikely meeting in his surgery had led to this joyous occasion. As Felicity stood beside her new husband, surrounded by the friends who had become her family in San Jose, she marveled at how a moment of violence and pain had ultimately led to such profound happiness. The bullet that had torn through her side might have ended her life. Instead, it had given her a new one, a life with a man whose courage and kindness matched her own strength and determination. "What are you thinking, Mrs. Blackburn?" Jackson murmured as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. Felicity smiled up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could be contained within her chest. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead us to the best ones if we're brave enough to keep going." "You've never lacked for bravery," he replied, pulling her closer. "It's one of the countless things I love about you." "And you've never lacked for kindness," she countered softly. "Even when kindness meant carrying a bleeding stranger to a doctor in the middle of the night." "Best decision I ever made," Jackson said with absolute certainty, his blue eyes filled with a love that still took her breath away. As the seasons turned, Felicity and Jackson built the life they had dreamed of together. The small herd grew, carefully bred and tended, until the Blackburn brand became known for quality throughout the region. Felicity continued her bookkeeping business from an office Jackson built for her in their home, though she scaled back her clients as their family expanded. Their first child, a son they named William after Felicity's father, arrived exactly 1 year after their wedding day. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, taking his first steps at barely 9 months old and running everywhere thereafter. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Eleanor, with her mother's auburn hair and a smile that could charm birds from the trees. Jackson doted on her shamelessly, already dreading the day when young men would come calling. Life was not without challenges. A harsh winter threatened the herd when William was 3, forcing Jackson to work day and night to save the cattle they had worked so hard to build. A fire in town destroyed several businesses whose accounts Felicity kept, requiring long hours of work to reconstruct the ledgers from memory. And there were the normal trials of marriage disagreements about how to discipline the children. Jackson's occasional restlessness when ranch work kept him too close to home for too long. Felicity's tendency to take on too much responsibility rather than ask for help. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, their bond strengthened rather than weakened by the obstacles they overcame. The memory of those first days of Felicity's courage in the face of danger, of Jackson's unwavering kindness to a stranger in need served as a foundation for a partnership built on mutual respect, and a love that deepened with each passing year. On their 10th anniversary, after the children had been tucked into bed with stories of how their parents had met, carefully edited for young ears, Jackson took Felicity's hand and led her out to the porch swing he had built when she was expecting William. 10 years, he marveled, settling beside her and pulling a blanket over their laps against the spring chill. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was carrying you through the streets of San Jose. Felicity leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his beneath the blanket. And sometimes it feels like I've loved you my entire life. Any regrets? He asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. About marrying a simple cowboy instead of one of those fancy businessmen who were always hanging around your office in town, she laughed softly. Not a single one. Though I do occasionally regret shooting Harlan Doyle in the hand instead of somewhere more permanently incapacitating. Jackson chuckled. Last I heard, he was still causing trouble up in the gold country. Some men never learn their loss, Felicity said with a contented sigh. I, on the other hand, learned the most valuable lesson of my life that night. What's that, my love? That sometimes the right man really does come along at just the right moment, even if that moment happens to involve gunfire and bloodshed. Jackson tipped her chin up to look into her eyes, still as captivating to him as they had been the first time she'd opened them in Dr. Sullivan's surgery. I would carry you 1,000 miles, bleeding or whole, Felicity Blackburn. You are the heart of my heart, the soul of my soul. And you, she whispered, leaning up to brush her lips against his, are the home I never knew I was looking for until I found you. As the stars wheeled overhead and the distant sounds of their ranch cattle lowing, the soft whicker of horses, the whisper of wind through the new leaves on the trees they'd planted together created a symphony around them. Felicity and Jackson held each other close, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the love that had kept them that way. From the moment of violence in a crowded saloon to this peaceful night on their porch, their journey had been one of healing, growth, and a deepening bond that neither time nor trials could diminish. The story that had begun with a gunshot and a desperate ride through darkened streets had become a testament to the power of courage, kindness, and the enduring strength of love. And as they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms beneath a canopy of stars, both knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them as they had faced everything else together, with unwavering faith in each other and in the love that had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined on that fateful night in San Jose.